My name is Chelsea Birchmier, and I'm a member and the co-president of the Graduate Employees Organization, or the GEO, the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And the GEO started in the 1980s as an advocacy group for graduate workers' rights. We didn't begin the struggle to unionize officially until the 1990s, and we didn't win our first contract until 2004, so it's been a protracted struggle. And we really came to be during a time in history when graduate labor was just starting to be recognized as labor. And this was a time when a lot of graduate worker unions were being formed. A lot more labor at the university was starting to be done by graduate workers, as well as by non-tenure track faculty, including adjunct faculty, as opposed to historically what had been the work of tenure track faculty. And that's where the slogan got popularized, "The university works because we do," which is a slogan that we still use today. And the GEO's major principles that are in our Constitution include the principles of democracy, inclusion, non-discrimination, and it says in our Constitution, above all, justice. And from these principles arise 5 objectives. And those objectives are organizing, building relationships and building power among graduate workers, collective bargaining, negotiating with the university on the conditions of our work and our wages, community, building community among graduate workers, education, ensuring accessible, equitable access to research and education at the university, and then finally, social justice and cooperation, cooperating with other labor unions as well as other struggles, other organizations that we're in solidarity with. And I think that last objective, social justice and cooperation, is especially relevant in this current moment that we're in. So our organization, the GEO, is part of the Campus Labor Coalition, and that's the unions on campus coming together in solidarity to make sure that we're all working together and we're all supporting each other in our struggles as workers and as unions on campus. We work really closely in the Campus Labor Coalition with the Non-Tenure Track Faculty Coalition, or the NTFC. We work really closely with SEIU, Local 73 building service and food service workers, with AFSCME, which includes healthcare as well as many clerical workers on campus. And we also aim to work with the Campus Faculty Association, which is tenured and tenure track faculty, undergraduate students, undergraduate workers, basically just trying to create a united front on campus so that anytime the university tries to make changes to our conditions of work, that we're all on board, that we all get to have a say in that, and that nothing happens unilaterally without the workers on campus having a say. And so historically, in terms of strikes and actions, the GEO was actually the first union to go on strike at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign since the 1960s. And that strike in 2009 happened in the context of the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009. And it precipitated several other strikes, which included a strike by the SEIU, Local 73, the building service and food service workers, as well as the NTFC, non-tenure track faculty. And then in 2018, GEO had the longest strike in the university's history. It was a 12-day strike, and that was my first year here at the University of Illinois. I think it was a really important moment for us. It built a lot of camaraderie among graduate workers, being in struggle together, being on such a long strike. I think it was a really important moment in our history. We also have been doing some work actions around changes that have happened recently, such as the university increasing our healthcare premiums by 33%. We had a car rally to address that. COVID-19, a lot of our workers didn't receive PPE or masks while they were still expected to go into work over the summer. and they kind of had to rely on volunteers, et cetera, which is not fair and it's not safe. We're doing a kind of rapid mobilization right now because we just found out that ICE released a statement saying that international students, which includes graduate students and graduate workers, will not be allowed to stay in the United States if they take all of their courses online, which of course poses a risk for many of our members and for universities that are planning on having hybrid course structures in the fall, where some courses will be online and some will be in person. I think this incident with ICE goes to show how important it is for our members in the GEO, for graduate students and workers in general, as well as the local Champaign-Urbana community, to demand that ICE raids stop and that ICE does not have a place here in our community, because this affects all of us. This statement that they released, basically saying that graduate workers could be deported if they don't take all of their courses online, is a direct threat to the health and the safety of our members. It was already bad enough that during a pandemic, a lot of our workers would be expected to be in a classroom full of students, and now there's the threat of deportation if they don't. And so I think that's a really important demand, and it's very connected to what's happening with the graduate students now, and it's also connected to the local struggle against the police. So there have been some really amazing, really well-organized and well-coordinated protests that have been put on by really young Black organizers, including Pain to Peace, which is high school students organizing in our area, Her, Healing Every Revolutionary, Champaign All Black Lives Matter, HV Neighborhood Transformation, which is doing a lot of important work in neighborhoods and having a block party events and consciousness raising in the local neighborhoods, as well as the Malcolm X grassroots movement, which has been hosting a lot of live streams on Zoom and Facebook, talking about their analyses of the current moment. And I also think we're in an unprecedented moment, both locally and globally, where we're seeing a massive amount of rebellions, right? This is an uprising. And so we've seen protests in more than 40% of the counties in the US and more than 40 countries globally in every continent except Antarctica. And a really unique thing about these protests is while they emerged in response to the police murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, as well as the lynching of Ahmaud Arbery in the United States, each struggle has taken on its own local dimension. So for instance, in Palestine, there were protests against the murder of Ahmed Erekat. In Mexico, there were protests against the murder of Giovanni Lopez, and countless other incidents. Locally here, we have our own past. There have been, it has been brought up again, the murder of Kiwan Carrington, and there was a recent incident of police brutality against citizen Aaliyah Lewis, who is still facing charges. And so a lot of the local struggles have emerged around that. And to the question of whether these protests will be enough to affect changes, we've seen in a lot of cities that they have very rapidly, in some cities, brought changes. Locally, we haven't seen too much movement besides the Urbana Police Department, which reduced 2% of its budget spending on police, which is not enough, and I know people will keep pushing. But charges still need to be dropped against Aaliyah Lewis and the 27 protesters who were arrested. And there's a lot of change that still needs to happen locally. One thing that has happened, I think, is there has been a massive amount of political education happening. I think consciousness has been growing, and so many people are supporting defunding the police now and reinvesting that money into Black and brown communities that have been historically divested from, so that the police could get all of the money that they have now. And so I think a lot more people are conscious of that right now, and I think that is really due to the rebellions and due to the protests for changing that consciousness. One education project that has been happening is an organization called the Ubuntu Project, and they had a panel recently addressing this question of what needs to happen when the rebellions die down to make sure that this momentum is sustained and that change actually happens. And I would highly recommend looking into their panel. It's on their Facebook on the Ubuntu Project. Dr. Ashley Howard, who was a panelist, said this quote that I really liked, when the door is cracked, kick it open, meaning that we need to take advantage of the political opportunities that are presenting themselves to us now. And when the cities are facing financial difficulties, that's the perfect time for us to push for defunding the police. You're having financial difficulties, take that money from the police, don't take it from the people who are already having their social services cut, who have already faced austerity. Professor Sundiata Chajua made the case for organizing block by block, which organizations are doing, HV Neighborhood Transformation, for example, and organizing specifically for Black self-sufficiency, self-defense, and self-determination. And Professor Lou Turner brought up the need to attend to the new organizational forms and social relationships that are developing in this moment that have a lot of revolutionary potential in those forms. And looking into things like the Seattle Autonomous Zone or Occupied Protest, looking into what organizational forms we have developing locally is really important. And I think locally we really can achieve change if we're all coming together in coalition like we are with the CCARC, and we're making sure to coordinate the struggle again on these different pressure points in the areas of schools, cities, universities, and police unions or the labor movement. So the GEO released a statement calling for the AFL-CIO, the AFT, or the American Federation of Teachers, and the IFT, or the Illinois Federation of Teachers, to expel police unions from their ranks. And in that statement, we wrote that police are the enemies of the labor movement. And so to think of police as laborers, we think would be a mistake. And part of the reason is because police unions have so many protections that regular unions don't. Right? We're trying to fight for a living wage. We're trying to have a say in our working conditions. Whereas police unions have protections against investigations and against misconduct. So, for example, I was looking into the city of Urbana's police contract with the FOP, or the Fraternal Order of the Police. And they have in their contract that written warnings or reprimands can be removed from their personnel files between 1 and 2 years after they're written. We also saw that they have seniority provisions in their contract. So basically the last ones in are the first ones out. So the more senior officers, like the Derek Chauvins of the world, are left in the police force when there are budget cuts. So that's something we really have to think about with defunding, is we don't want these police officers that might have these multiple incidents of misconduct in their past to remain on the police force when we start to defund. They also have 120 hours of paid leave to attend police union conferences. Again, that's not in any other union contracts, and those police union conferences are really a space for indoctrination with white supremacist values. In the Urbana contract, there's also a memorandum of understanding about the Civilian Police Review Board. And it says that police do not have to participate, so it's voluntary for them to participate in the CPRB. No one with a felony can serve on the CPRB. And the police department will internally complete its investigation before it's even come to the CPRB. So the police union contract basically renders the CPRB useless. And I haven't looked as much into the Champaign contract with the police union, but it seems to have very similar provisions in it. It also has it also has something in there about investigation times before which police can be investigated. It says that a police officer must receive a list of allegations 72 hours in advance of an investigation. And it's just crazy to think about that because no civilian, right, no citizen has those rights that a police officer has before an investigation. And we also need to look at the state level because there's something in Illinois called the Uniform Peace Officers Act, which, applies to all police unions in Illinois, in addition to what's in their contract. And it has stipulations about when and how a police investigation can happen. For instance, it states that police officers must be investigated at a reasonable time of day. And what is a reasonable time of day is dictated by the police department. And so there's all kinds of things that give police officers a lot of time to prepare, get their story straight, and it really allows them to get away quite literally with murder. So those are some of the main differences, and that's part of the reason, again, we released this statement. It's part of the reason why on July 28th we're going to the Illinois AFL-CIO State Convention with a resolution to expel police unions. And it's also the reason why we're trying to start a conversation both within the GEO as well as within all the labor unions on campus and locally about the role of police unions and what is their role in the labor movement. At the GEO, we don't think they have a role in the labor movement. And again, there's a lot of changes we want to fight for that aren't just within these contracts, but it's also at the state level. For instance, House Representative Carol Ammons has discussed legislation that would stop police departments from getting surplus military equipment, which is a practice that has been very common since the 2000s. And that's part of the reason why there's the police that we see today are so militarized. We also need to be questioning, I think, even the recognition of the police union by the Illinois Public Relations Act. Police have been recognized as workers since the 1980s by this act. Just to provide a comparison, research assistants and pre-professional graduate assistants at the University of Illinois only just got the legal right to be considered workers, employees, and to have collective bargaining rights. So again, police unions have been getting all kinds of rights that most laborers have had to, really fight for. And these police unions are so powerful that they have the power to really dictate policy too. So they're not playing a role in society that is helpful. At the federal level, there's also the problem of qualified immunity, which basically gives police officers leeway to violate people's rights as long as it doesn't violate a specific law. And John Oliver had a really good video about this where he was showing how specific that law had to be. It actually had to have been found unconstitutional by a previous case, the exact crime the police had committed, down to the day, the time, like very specific details. So there have been a lot of efforts, I think, to get rid of qualified immunity for that reason, because it gives police the freedom to really use excessive force and not be held responsible for that. And I think it's really important to be having this conversation now at this time in history when we're seeing so much labor insurgency, and it's really a time to start defining what the labor movement should be in this current moment. We've seen with COVID-19, we saw a huge amount of strikes from Amazon workers, Instacart workers, a lot of workers in the gig economy. We also saw them from fast food workers. A lot of workers recognizing that they are essential, workers who have historically been made most inessential by capital. And so I think it's a really important moment in history for us to have this conversation. There was a major protest by the International Longshore Warehouse Union. They shut down the West Coast ports on Juneteenth in solidarity with the protests against police brutality. So again, I think this is the perfect time to be having these conversations, both locally and internationally. I think coordinating at the 4 pressure points that I mentioned earlier, at the level of the cities, at the level of the schools, at the level of the unions or the labor movement, and at the level of the university will be really effective in seeing that change, seeing the defunding that we've seen in many other cities that you mentioned. Again, I think, like I mentioned before, police unions are a huge barrier to the change that we want to see. So I think fighting the power of the police unions will be really important. At the university level, I think questioning the university's priorities and what it spends its budget on has been a really prominent question. Seeing the salaries of graduate workers, right, who make under $18,000, even non-tenure faculty who make $45,000, building food service workers who make between $30,000 and $40,000, whereas a starting police officer makes $60,000. A lieutenant makes $115,000, and the director of the Police Training Institute makes $150,000 a year. So we can really see where the university is putting its priorities, and I think we want to make it clear and build solidarity among labor unions on campus, among community members, among students, graduate workers, that we see the budget and we know the university has the money to make the demands, for instance, of the letter that's been circulating calling for the university to divest from local police and to defund University of Illinois PD. Again, we can use this knowledge and this solidarity to our advantage to call for them to make cuts from the police budget, from upper administrative salary instead of from the people at the bottom. So I think, again, targeting those 4 coordinated areas, and again, coming in coalition like we are with the CCARC is really a way to coordinate the struggle across these different domains. The divestment letter that has been circulating is calling for the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign to divest, so to cut its ties with local police, the Champaign police, as well as to defund the University of Illinois police department. And I think that's important too, because if the city police budgets decrease, but the University of Illinois police department's budget increase, then next thing you know, the UIPD's jurisdiction is expanding and we have more police. And the letter is also calling for the money to go to meet the demands of Project 1000 to recruit and enroll and provide scholarships for 1,000 Black students to attend the U of I, a goal which still hasn't been met or even come close to in past years. If they defund the department, they'll have the money to provide a living wage to all campus workers. They'll be able to provide resources for Black well-being both at the university and in the community. They'll be able to hire and retain Black faculty, to fund the African American Studies Department and the African American Cultural Center. All of these vital resources on campus that where money is going to the police instead of going to those vital resources. We still need to have a larger conversation as the GEO about our ideology as it relates to defunding or abolishing the police. So I'm not speaking for the whole of the GEO here. When our committees and our leadership have written on the subject, they have taken an abolitionist stance of advocating for a world without policing. And the way that the GEO committees work is anyone can join a committee and anyone can start a working group. And so our Solidarity Committee has relative autonomy over the statements that they publish and the stances that they take. And again, we still want to have this conversation at a larger scale. But I do think it's nice that we have that committee structure. That way, anyone can participate and have a role in, forming the GEO's ideology. I think we also need to be discussing kind of the deeper ideological questions at stake and start asking, what is the function of the police in the United States? as many activists, including activists here at protests, have brought up, there is the history of the police as slave patrols. The police also serve a function of regulating labor. Again, part of the reason why the police are enemies of labor. They are strike breakers. They are not our friends when it comes to labor action. And they serve a particular role of regulating what's been called the Reserve Army of Labor. Gus Wood, on his new Radio Free Labor show, brought up this class of people, which he called the sub-working class. And it's a growing class. It's actually the predominant class in the United States right now. It consists of unemployed or underemployed people in low-wage jobs. A lot of them have to work multiple jobs to make ends meet, and it includes the service sector, such as fast food workers. And a major role of the police, as well as jails and prison, has been to regulate and discipline this population. And then the police also serve to protect private property. And so there was a really good piece that was written by Nefta Freeman and Max Rameau in the Black Agenda Report, where they were talking about how in South Africa, a lot less public spending goes to the police. And that is in part because they hire private security firms to protect their private property. So the conclusion is that capitalists are not going to let their private property go unprotected, right? They're not going to let labor uprise, right? So there are two kind of conclusions that come from that. One is defunding is essential, right? Defunding, if done right, is going to have a major effect on police brutality and police murders by cutting down the force, right? It's also going to allow that money to go into resources in communities that have been severely divested from. It's going to allow that money to go into social services, into resources, into jobs, everything that people desperately need in these times of austerity. But there also has to be community control, right? Democratic control of the police, and people should have a say in whether they want to be policed, how they want to be policed, if they want police to be from their community or not, if they want to hire or fire the police chief, and they should have those say in those decisions. They should also have a say in decisions of the budget, right? People should get to vote on the city's budget. We should have processes of participatory budgeting in place. So that's the first conclusion. The second conclusion is we need to be thinking about our ideology and about our long-term strategy. Again, this is a conversation the GEO, really needs to have among our members. But I think if our ideology is not revolutionary, if our long-term strategy is not radical, or if it is not anti-capitalist, then we can't succeed ultimately in abolition of the police as servants of white supremacy and capitalism. Because again, we have to look at the conditions that created a need for the police and a need for jails and prisons. And if there isn't a revolution in those conditions, then they will find a way to police labor. They will find a way to protect their private property. I think the GEO has work to do internally before we can say that we are revolutionary. I think that we have certain processes and structures built into how our organization operates that give us the potential to develop revolutionary ideology. We have processes of direct democracy in many areas of our work. So for instance, all of our members vote on our budget. It's not decided by elected officials. We allow anyone to participate in committees or start a working group. And again, those committees and working groups have some autonomy in the decisions that they make and the activities that they do. We also, in our Constitution, explicitly state that one of our principles is justice above all, and one of our objectives is social justice and cooperation. That is very important because it allows us to expand beyond what unions are typically thought to do, which is just protect the direct working conditions of our members, and to just fight for those very direct, immediate needs. Whereas we are saying that we want to go above and beyond that and work towards social justice and cooperation. So I think that sets the stage for us to develop a more revolutionary ideology. And again, I think our committees have taken steps toward that. We released a statement in support of the calls for Black self-sufficiency, self-defense, and self-determination. We have taken abolitionist stances. We have called for unions to expel police unions from their ranks. We have taken anti-capitalist stances in terms of calling for a people over profits, people first approach to the university reopening in the fall. Now we're working on a statement against ICE because of the statement that ICE released yesterday, calling for international students and graduate workers to not be allowed to stay in the United States if they take all of their courses online. So I think we've made steps toward that. We just need to be more explicit. And then finally, we need to have a conversation at large with our membership. We need to engage our membership, many of whom have been activated and galvanized both by COVID-19 and how they've seen the university treat them and how they've seen their governments treat them during COVID-19, as well as by this uprising for Black lives. And I think we need to act upon that galvanization. We need to engage our members about what their interpretations and analyses are of the current moment, and we need to engage in political education, which I think involves both reading history and theory about the Black liberation movement, about labor struggles, about unions, about capitalism, about socialism. And I think it also involves political education from on-the-ground struggles. What can we learn from the community, right? What can we learn from what is happening on the ground? And how do we incorporate that into our analyses and how we understand the world? And I think those are the processes that need to happen for us to develop a revolutionary ideology. Being in coalition with the organizations in the CCARC, I think provides the opportunity for a targeted, coordinated, and directed struggle. It allows for communication between organizations. It allows for us to plan together, to coordinate actions, and to get on the same page about several objectives that we're all working towards. It doesn't mean that we all are going to share the same ideology, right, in coalition, and that can be difficult at times, but it does mean that we have more power to achieve the change that we want to see because we're all in the room together. And any force in the city will have to reckon with a coalition, right, with all of the organizations in a coalition if we come together. And it also aligns with our objective, again, of social justice and cooperation, because, again, that's in our Constitution, and that's something that is an essential part of our union. And I think the GEO, as an organization that has emerged out of struggle with the university, has a lot of knowledge to contribute in terms of the inner workings of the university and how it operates. I think we also have knowledge as a labor union about police unions, and I think that knowledge can really come to bear on the struggle now. In turn, I think we have a lot to learn from, again, from the on-the-ground struggles of the community and the struggle to get SROs out of schools that has been happening in the community for a long time. I think we have a lot to learn from people's history, from their analyses, and what they want to see in terms of defunding the police and where they want that funding to go. There's a quote that I really like. I found it when I was doing research on a project that I'm working on with Professor Lou Turner and a few other graduate students, and the project is on someone named Harold Barron. He was an early theorist of racial formation and transformation. He was the director of research at the Chicago Urban League, and he was also an advisor to Harold Washington in Chicago. And so I found this piece by Martin Luther King Jr. While I was reading through his manuscripts. And it was from the Saturday Review in 1965, where he was writing on the Watts Rebellion. And he was discussing the errors that he felt civil rights leaders had made with regard to the North in the United States. And one of those errors was that civil rights leaders had thought that the gains made by the civil rights movement in the South would automatically extend to the North. And he said in doing so, they had forgotten what they knew daily in the South, which was, quote, freedom is not given, it is won by struggle. And so I just wanted to say that quote because I'm really honored to be part of this coalition, and I'm honored to be in this struggle for freedom in coalition.